Hi, I hope that you've already tried the daily incentive points for week 10, Tuesday, block 2, before looking at the answers. It's not really all that helpful just to write the answers down on your paper. It's really something that you should try to struggle with a little bit and see how you do. And then come here and make sure that you have it all right. And so the first thing I asked you to do is factor. And so I'm going to factor this binomial, and how that binomial would factor is it has a greatest common factor of x. So every binomial, you start by thinking about the greatest common factor. In this case, that's x. So that's x plus 1, because x times x is x squared, and x times 1 is x. So that's how that factored. And then I'm going to factor this binomial, and I notice, well, that's a difference of squares. And so how a difference of squares factors, you have your parentheses, and x, and a plus and a minus, and a 1 times 1, right? And you can FOIL that together and see that it's what I started with. And then this is x cubed minus 1, and that's a difference of cubes. And how that factors is you have to think about the formula, right? And then you can write it out. So the formula is this: a cubed minus b cubed equals a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. So I've memorized that formula and I just wrote it out. And then right underneath here, right below it, I'm going to write x to the third minus, and then 1. I want to write this with a cube. And so it is just 1 to the third. So 1 to the third. So where I see a, I'm going to replace it with x. And where I see b, I'm going to replace it with 1 in my little formula. So this is going to go x minus 1. And then this is going to be x squared. And then I'm going to multiply the 1 and the x together, right? Because the x times 1, which is 1x, so plus 1x. And which is the same as x, and then 1 squared, which is 1. So this thing factors, I just use the formula, x minus 1 times x squared plus x plus 1. And then the last one to factor is this, and it's a trinomial, and I can't help but notice that, hey, that's the same trinomial I have here. And I know this trinomial is prime because it came from that formula. And so this is also prime. It doesn't factor. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with it, it just doesn't factor. And then here they're asking us to practice our function notation from chapter 6, right? So it gives us this f, which is a rational expression. It gives us this g, and it asks us to divide them. And so we'll give a try to that. Now this is by the shortcut notation for at x, right? So this is really f at x divided by g at x. That's by definition what that is equal to. And so now we know what f of x is. This is the output for the f of x. It's x squared plus x over x cubed minus x divided by, and then g of x, well, g of x is this: x squared minus x over x squared plus x minus plus 1. And what it means to divide is it means to write as a multiply. So I'd like to flip-flop this, right? Multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to leave this fraction, this first fraction, the same. And I'm going to times it by flipping this over, the reciprocal. And then how you multiply that is you factor all 4. So you factor all 4 pieces, and the good news is I kind of did that. We did that together already. We factored all of those pieces. So how does x squared plus x factor? It factors as x times x plus 1. So I'm going to replace that with the factored form. How does x cubed minus 1 factor? Well, here we factored it, so I'm going to replace it with the factored form. Times. How does x squared plus x plus 1 factor? Well, it was prime, so it doesn't factor, so I'm going to put parentheses around the whole thing, around the whole trinomial, to say that I tried to factor it, but it wouldn't. And then x squared minus 1, how does it factor? X plus 1, x minus 1, it was a difference of squares. And then because this is a times, I can say, well, I'll multiply the numerator together and multiply the denominator together, push the whole thing together. And then anything that's in the top that's exactly the same as something in the bottom would reduce. So like if there was a single monomial x in the denominator, which there's not, there's only a binomial, a trinomial, and a binomial, and a binomial, then it would reduce, but there isn't. If there is a binomial x plus 1, it'll reduce. So I'm looking for a binomial x plus 1, and oh, there is. So x plus 1 divided by x plus 1 is 1, right? So I'm done with that. And then this is a trinomial, and this trinomial, x squared plus x, is exactly the same as this trinomial here, coincidentally. And so they'll divide out and make 1. So in the numerator, we have x times 1, if you like, which is x. And in the denominator, we have x minus 1 times x minus 1. And of course, since those are the same, you can write that as x minus 1 squared. Now, some people tell me, oh, they're the same, so they would cancel out. Well, you only can reduce something when you have the same thing in the numerator and the denominator, and then you divide it out and it makes 1. So if you divide things that are equal in the numerator and the denominator, you get 1. Okay, I'm going to set this paper over here just where I can see it, because I'm going to need it because I'm going to do some adding and subtracting, and I'm going to need my factoring where I did that. So this, by definition, this is shortcut for at x, and then by definition, this is f at x plus g at x. And then this is our function here, and so that's what f is. So let's see, that's x squared plus x divided by x cubed minus 1 plus, and then x squared minus 1 over x squared plus x plus 1. Now, what you have to do in order to add those together is you have to get a common denominator. And the common denominator would require that you factor the denominators. So I already know how this denominator factors. I factored it. X minus 1 times x squared plus x plus 1. And I know that this denominator over here doesn't factor, x squared plus x plus 1. So I just looked up where I factored that. I didn't try to factor it again or anything like that. I'm looking at my numerator, and remember when I factored it, it doesn't reduce with my denominator. So I'm just going to put it up here. If it did, maybe I could save a little work and in this numerator as well. And so now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about the lowest common denominator. And this one says, well, you got to have a binomial x minus 1. And this says, well, you got to have that trinomial. And this one says, yeah, I agree about the trinomial. We both have it. And I'm just missing the x minus 1. So we would just have to multiply here in the numerator by x minus 1 and also in the denominator by x minus 1. Ooh, that didn't get an x minus 1. I have a fancy dancy when you get writing in pencil, when you get writing in pen, x minus 1. And so these make 1. And so it leaves this fraction unchanged. And so now the denominators are the same. It has the same binomial, order doesn't matter, and trinomial. And so all I have to do now is multiply that together, and then I can add it with that. And then I'll be reducing and done. So when I multiply this together, that's FOIL. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared times minus 1 is minus x squared. Minus x plus 1. All divided by that denominator, the trinomial, Doesn't matter what order you write it in. So if you wanted to write the binomial first, you can. And then I still have this over here. So now the denominators are the same, and the numerators are where I can add them together. No longer is it involved in a multiply. I had to multiply it together before I could do the add. And so now I'm going to add those numerators together. X to the third plus x to the third is 2x to the third. And minus x squared, no like term there. And then x minus x is 0, and so plus 1. All divided by x minus 1 times x squared plus x plus 1. And then the numerator is nothing that we factored. It's a trinomial, but it doesn't have a greatest common factor, and it's not in the form of a trinomial, which is x squared, x, and then no x, right? It's x cubed. And so if you tried to factor it and kept multiplying it back together, it just wouldn't give you what you started with. And so this is just finished. So how is the next problem different? Well, it's a lot the same, actually. And so you could pause this video if you weren't able to do that problem. And that's a hard problem right there. If you, way harder problem, then it's a homework problem towards the end of the set. And so, but I was going to say a harder problem than some of the ones at the beginning. And so you could even pause and go try some homework and then come back and then try this one here. Oh, I should give you the code word for today. What will the code word for today be? The code word for today, I'm looking all around my office and thinking what would be something I will be able to remember and you'll be able to remember and will be good. I'm going to have it be joy. I'm thinking that everyone needs some joy through this, and so that's what it's going to be. Okay, so that's the code word for today, for Tuesday, and I'll be sending you the email asking you for those code words on Thursday, and that will be due back to me before Friday at noon. And so just for your plans on that. Okay, so when we start off the same story here at x, so this is f at x minus g at x, and so this is x squared plus x over x cubed minus 1 minus x squared minus x, right? And so we have some things that are exactly the same. Do you guys agree with this problem here? So this step should be the same, except for that should be a minus, right? This step should be the same, except for that should be a minus. So I'm going to give a dot, 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 and I'm going to go to that step, x cubed plus x over, and I'm going to put in the minus. And how does that change it? So this is x cubed minus x squared minus x plus x over okay. And so the deal when you have a minus is that you have to be more careful. When you have an add, there really is parentheses here as well. But then what you do in order to add them is you drop the parentheses and combine like terms. But when you have a minus, what you do, there's parentheses there when you have a minus, but you distribute the negative and combine like terms. So this is going to be x to the third plus x, and then I'm going to distribute that negative. Do I have a really bright pen? I used to have a really bright pen here. Thought I even used it today. And so when I multiply the negative times a positive, I get a negative x cubed. When I multiply here, I get a positive x squared. When I multiply the negative here, I get a positive x. And when I multiply the negative here, I get a negative 1. All over the same darn denominator in whatever order you want to write it in. I like to write binomials first and trinomials second. Then the x to the third and the x to the third make 0. And we get x squared. and we get an x plus an x, which is 2x, and we get a minus 1. And over the common denominator, and I'm looking at the numerator and asking myself, will it factor? And for a second there, I was thinking, oh, yeah, that is going to factor, right? But then I realized, oh, it's not really going to factor, right? Because x squared plus 2x minus 1, the signs have to be one positive and one negative, and it's going to subtract together to give the middle. And so the only way of making 1 is 1 times 1, and when I subtract those, I don't get 2. So this doesn't factor either, and then that's just my answer. And so there you have that, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you're studying some of them. And yes, chapter 7, we're making our words be happy, because chapter 7 is pretty rough, and it takes a lot of study to do it. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking with Andrea and seeing about whether or not that he can come to the office time, or the come to some drop-in hours that I'm going to have tomorrow. And so so be watching for those. I haven't decided exactly what time there are. I have to admit, I'm just so exhausted today. I'd like to do them some during the 8 o'clock class, and which really, tomorrow's Tuesday, so it goes from 8 to 9:25, and also some during the 1 o'clock class, just like 30 minutes in each one. I think that would be great. Okay, talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.